Howard Besser. I'm director of New York University's master's degree program in moving image archiving and preservation. And I'm going to try to go through a whole lot of different things pretty quickly that come out of about 30 years of working with cultural institutions very extensively, libraries, museums, archives, public television, and also working with students and teaching and learning kinds of issues. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about open content, then about some studies that I've done over the years about what scholars and artists need. I'm going to probably spend most of the time talking about underlying rights and issues around those. Then at the end, I'm going to get to some different funding and contractual models that are out there that might be interesting, and maybe if there's time, go through some of the concrete problems that libraries and archives go through, and finally give you some research that's needed. I'm glad that Cliff mentioned this earlier, but let me just elaborate. If I can, what happened? Okay. I think there's really, from my mind, two distinct types of open content, and these relate to Richard Stallman, who's very fond of talking about free beer versus free speech. We've been talking primarily about open content in terms of accessibility at little or no cost. But there's also the usability, and that's really, really critical. The ability to reuse content for recontextualization, repurposing, to use it in different ways. And I'll be showing some examples of that in the next 10 minutes. One of the projects, a very large project I was involved in the mid-1990s, a 3-year project called the Museum Educational Site Licensing Project, where we were looking at building essentially the first online slide library that was installed on university campuses and really heavily used. We have a report still up on the web that we wrote in 1998, a study of that project funded by the Mellon Foundation. But some of the things we found during that project, I'm not going to summarize this 150-page report, but some of the relevant things to what we're talking about here are that users needed to go, these are students and faculty members on university campuses using digital images from museums, that they need to go beyond passive viewing of that slide content. And that they needed the ability to regroup and contextualize slides and to create added value, to essentially create secondary works that regroup them. So here's some examples of some of the things that they did, that teachers did in the course of that, where they took images from multiple museums. They created a thematic kind of set of learning tools, and then they put those back into the commons for that project, and these were picked up and used in other universities. So the ability to get them, to separate them out, they were put in the repository by museum, to make these thematic connections, and then to put that out as a learning unit that was then used by others. So that was one of the things we just saw. Some of the other things we developed as part of that project at the University of Maryland, we had art history students use text to describe a painting, and then studio art students actually draw or paint the painting from the textual description, and then put those up next to each other as a real learning tool. So the ability to copy in some ways and to mimic is part of what learning is, and we've always had that, and I'll circle back around to that a little bit later. This is our study of that project that we did for Mellon in '98. Related to this is this set of images that I've kept up for more than 10 years of images. I take images when I go on trips. Some of you may have seen me taking photos of you here. These will, without any releases from you, are going to go up on my website, and I'm building this set of content, and then I have my students actually use those to write stories, to write photo novellas, things like that. And I've been doing this for many years, and here's some clusters of them. Generally they have to write a fictional narrative and a fact-based narrative using these. So we start out with things like, this is my wife and I in Rome. And this is just the linear photos in chronological order. That's what they get. And out of those, they create these interesting kind of tours of Pompeii, or an English, Brazilian, Portuguese Pictionary. So they're creating these new things, and then these new things go back into this area on the web that is publicly open to use. And I've been trying to keep persistent URLs with all of these, even as I move from university to university, so that people can continue to build on these. So let me now switch to what's, I think, at the heart of what I want to be talking about, and this is underlying rights. And some of you may have heard the question I asked about this to the MIT folks yesterday. A repository may have the right to the whole of a particular work, but not have a right to the component parts. So, for example, whatever repository is going to get the videotapes of this conference, there are lots of talks that people have given in this conference where they've shown slides or images that they have a fair use right to show in the context of this conference. But once we videotape that and put it out on the web or try to distribute that, there's underlying rights associated with that, which may not have that same fair use right. So this kind of third-party information and underlying rights are often either asserted through fair use or granted for a limited time, a particular kind of use, or a particular geographic region. And this is really significant when we start getting into moving images and multimedia. So this is what has caused, like, the eyes on the prize problem, where we can no longer distribute eyes on the prize. This has caused problems. This is a work by Barbara Kruger, who was sued by the estate of Thomas Hopker for the underlying image there. And if you think about it, postmodern art is all about this. It's taking pre-existing works and recontextualizing them in a different way to create a new work. But 20th century art was all about this, from Picasso and Braque's collages in the early part of the century, Dada surrealism, through pop art, postmodern art, jazz, rap, sampling music has all been about this. And we can expect that that's not going to go away because we hit a millennium. But these kind of underlying rights are everywhere. They're not just in these whole works that take a large chunk of something. So there's if we're doing an audio tape interview or an oral history, there may be copyrighted music that's playing in the background. There was actually a court case over a copyrighted television program that was playing on a television set in the background of an incident of footage that was the center point of a documentary. But there's also the street scene or the videotaped interview that has that in the background, or the copyrighted billboard in the background of street scene photography. Or the stock footage used in a documentary when the filmmaker only got 10-year non-theatrical exhibition rights or 3-year cable TV rights. Or the web page that displays a copyrighted photo by linking to it, not actually copying it, but maybe they got permission, but then when you incorporate their web page into your new thing, you get permission from them, but you don't have the underlying rights permission. So all of this gets really hairy, and I'll circle back to that in a minute or two. Now, when you are trying to preserve digital works, you have this serious problem that your physical store, you have to move it from one physical storage to another, and you have to move it from one file format to another. You know, this is the typical, anyone use a word processor 15 years ago? Probably WordStar. Can you read those WordStar files? No. Okay, so in order to preserve these things, we need to be able to copy them and often transform them or move them from one physical file format to another. So because we have this kind of obsolete, anyone have 8-track tapes? No. Did anyone have 8-track tapes in the past? What happened to them? Yeah. But, you know, we have Bernoulli boxes, zip drives, SideQuest drives, things like that. So if we want to migrate these things, it requires copying to new formats. But any form of copy is regulated by copyright laws, which may make copying for either refreshing or migration illegal. Migration can involve some form of transformation, which might run up against the moral rights of a copyright holder. It might involve circumvention of digital protection mechanisms, which is illegal in many jurisdictions. And if we go the route of emulation for preservation instead of migration, the software we need for emulation often involves reverse engineering or other adaptation of previously existing software, and that's illegal in many jurisdictions. So I'm actually heading a study of this for the Interpares group, which is an international group of studying electronic records in archives. This is part of a general issue of policy for preservation of these things. So we're about 2/3 of the way through a short, limited study of the problems caused by underlying rights, the legality of refreshing, migration, and emulation. Do we have a preservation right to copy? In certain jurisdictions we do, in others we do not, but there's even problems with that in the ones that do. Dangers involved in infringement, and since we're an international project, there's jurisdictional issues. These kind of underlying rights often impact an archive or repository's ability to show works to researchers, and sometimes it inhibits their ability to make preservation copies. Some European countries actually have exemptions for what they call incidental capture. This is the music playing in the background of an interview, or the television on in the window of a street shot, things like that. We don't in the United States. Now, some countries have exemptions for refreshing and migration that allow you to take your music tapes and put them on CD, but then most of these countries require you then to destroy the tapes. These are really consumer exemptions. They're not repository exemptions. And with a digital repository, when you do these transformation from one file format to another, you usually want to keep your previous file as an audit trail and as a safety kind of thing because of your transformations. So even the countries that have exemptions for this tend to be exemptions that are consumer-oriented and not very useful for preservation purposes. We're looking at a lot of these things through inter pares. And also looking at the issues of who could see these things. Is it really a dark archive for a certain period of time, things like that. We're also, because this is a project for archivists, the archivists are worried about whether they're going to get hauled off to jail for doing some of this. So we're looking at what the penalties are for infringement. We're looking at indemnification issues for people who do this as part of their work in a preservation facility, and looking at some recommended policy changes. There's also lots of interesting things that come up about whose jurisdiction do you fall under. It's usually where the work was created, but there's certain jurisdictions like at Antarctica, and we actually have some content that was created in Antarctica that don't have copyright laws. They're, treaty-based, which is actually quite interesting. But of course, that works created in an area without copyright laws doesn't mean that those works don't have copyright, that various countries will claim the copyright, like the country of residence of the person who created it. These are like joint collaborative projects in Antarctica, so we could be involved in international litigation for the next 20 years about this. Anyway, that's enough of the inter pares project, except to say that we're also looking at international laws and international guidelines, and the most promising thing is the development agenda for WIPO. If you look at the second bullet here, in order to tap into the development potential offered by the digital environment, it's important to bear in mind the relevance of open access models for the promotion of innovation and creativity. In this regard, WIPO should consider undertaking activities with a view to exploring the promise held by open collaborative projects to develop public goods, as exemplified by Human Genome Project and open source software. Now, it would be great if WIPO really followed that on everything else, but so that's a piece of it. So now let me get back to the underlying rights and look specifically at some projects my students have been working on with public television. This next set of projects has been headed by Rena Pantaloni, who's here, who teaches intellectual property for us. Even though she's a lawyer for the Canadian government on intellectual property, she's teaching for us at NYU. And our students have done copyright audits of various types of public television works. Here's some of the observations from a program called 51st State, where the volume of contracts and agreements is absolutely astounding. I mean, my colleagues from WGBH here can really back me up on this. The amount of time for a single program to try to look at and clear those underlying rights is just incredible. You have music licenses, you have contracts and licenses with composers, you have union contracts, you have licensing agreements for individual segments, you have the underlying literary material, you have artwork and still photographs, contracts for location shots, footage licensing, after contracts, that's for actors. Writers' contracts, composer contracts, consultant contracts, director contracts, and it just gets totally hairy, the kind of levels of things that you have to clear. So our students looked at as a major project. They examined about 20 episodes of this program from public television that was quite well known at its time, looking at terms of contract, use stipulations, incomplete files, music, and other kind of issues. Found that the contracts were at times very clear and detailed, and at others really vague. This, I should mention, is a fairly old program. It's about 35 years old. And in kind of looking at the summary of that, most of there were more areas in which the rights weren't clear than or there were unclear answers than where there were clear answers. So anyway, I just got warning on time, so I'm not going to go through the details. So let me just spend another minute talking about some concrete problems facing cultural repositories as well as creators. The rights clearance for historical photographs is incredibly burdensome. These are the kind of unknown or undated photographs you have of a small town in Nebraska, street scenes that are, great for history. Now, technically, you should identify who the photographer is, which you probably can't do. Find out whether it was ever later published. Find out whether he or she ever sold the rights. All of this, which is almost impossible to find before you can make a reproduction, put it up on the web, whatever. And only if you can affirmatively trace back and clear all the rights should you be able to make it accessible. But if we did this, we'd never be able to publish most of our historical photographs because photographer's unknown and we can only guess the date. Even with some of the proposed orphans changes, this really isn't is going to be very difficult and in some cases impossible. And I can go to that later. Now, works can be scanned. We've scanned works at the NYU libraries, but then we're scared of getting sued for putting these up, and so got cold feet. We scanned the Barrel collection, which is Lewis Carroll's original works and drawings and things. But one of the illustrators has some survivors who are a little bit litigation prone. And so suddenly we just pulled all that stuff and it's just not available. There's all kinds of issues when you point to other works. Your website incorporates other works, like with the Walt Whitman Archive, where you kind of inherit some of those underlying issues. Bad can be really bad. There's a study funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Peter Jazzy and Pat Ofterhide have been looking at documentary filmmakers and how high the cost for rights clearance is, and that keeps the documentary films from being made. If these things were more available and more accessible, they could be made. So finally, let me just talk for another minute about different funding and contractual models. At NYU, we have a substantial grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to develop content for our moving image archiving and preservation program. We believe that content created with federal funds should be publicly accessible. We've been working with UC Berkeley's Samuelson Clinic, and particularly with Laura Quilter, who just left there recently. She's in the back, so that we could write a contract that would allow us to hire consultants to create this instructional content, let the creators own or have unrestricted access to the content they create, but require that they execute a Creative Commons license that allows unlimited content use with attribution for educational nonprofit purposes. So again, putting this stuff back into a commons. There's this issue, another point, there's this issue that museums, we went through this about 12 years ago with museum directors. They thought if they put their images up online, those would decrease physical visits to the museum. It would make things, it would wreck their funding. And as Kati mentioned, in fact, we find that it tends to increase visits to the museums. And the museums developed a kind of price discrimination where they will charge for access to very high resolution images because those are used in advertising, things like that. And that places like the Getty are completely open and allowing all the other images to be used for free for whatever they want. There's also this issue of trying to use tourism funds for cultural organizations to put their material up online, and to have the tourism fund, because people coming to that state or that region will be more attracted to that if they see things from the various cultural organizations. And then finally, my last example of a kind of different economic model is Rick Prellinger's collection that is marketed by a stock footage house that was bought by Getty Images. Originally, when Rick started putting up MPEG-4s of his content, these movies, these short educational films and industrial films, the Getty Images, the distributor, got very angry and was very upset. They found, in fact, that this led to more sales for them, not less. So now, if you go to Getty's site, they have a link to Rick Prellinger's site at the Internet Archive. And what is essentially happening here is that people are using the Internet Archive and using the free site to browse and to look at things and to look at them really solid and to maybe even make rough edits, decide what they want. And then, instead of using that copy, their lawyers want them to have some kind of paperwork saying that they officially got this from a reputable company, essentially a form of indemnification. So they're still paying, and this is actually increasing sales for Getty Images. Okay, so my last slide. The kind of research that I think we need. We need research into the cost of rights clearance and the percentage of production budgets that go into this. I would not be surprised if somewhere around 50% of the production costs for a documentary film went into rights clearance. But we don't have any data on that. I think that's really important in terms of underlying rights. Looking at the value of the reuse industry, from used bookstores, used recording stores, to content creation, incorporating pre-existing content from open sources like fair use, public domain, Creative Commons. We need to explore methods for requiring that content created with public funds become open to the public. We need to look at the cost of long-term sustainability of open content for both preservation and access. We need to look at incidental copying, how frequent it is, and what kind of issues that raises. And we need to look at the extensiveness of copying without permission. I think it would really be interesting to look at young kids who learn by copying. I mean, you learn drawing by copying, you learn writing by copying, and most of that is probably from copying out of copyrighted books and copying drawing out of drawings that are copyrighted, and to actually see that kind of role of copying in learning at an early age. I think that would be a very, very useful kind of piece of research. So that's all. I'm out of time, and those are some URLs.
Peter, how much time should I take? 5 minutes? 2. Okay. That's really okay. I'm Ellen Dunlap. I'm the president of the American Antiquarian Society, a national research library of American history, located some 40 miles from here in Worcester, Mass. And when Peter asked me to speak at a meeting like this of devotees of open content, I kind of wondered exactly what he was thinking about. As we all know, Peter's mind is wired a little differently than the rest of us. And I thought that the idea of inviting me as the representative of an institution that is so in recent years been totally identified with commercial publication of historical media materials was an interesting thing to juxtapose into this group. The paper that I was going to read really sought to try to explain something of the genesis of how we as an organization got to the point that we were in such a strong partnership with a commercial vendor. And it is something that I'd be happy to talk to any of you about over the course of the day today. But in the interest of time and really to begin a conversation about how commercial use and open content use needs to evolve together, I just thought I would make a few comments about what the Antiquarian Society is doing and what the realities of economics of an institution like ours is. The Antiquarian Society, as I said, is definitely a bricks and mortar place. We are a national independent research library. We have no umbrella to stand under or net below us in terms of either our economics or our technological capacity. We are like your neighborhood historical society, but an example you should put on steroids. We're the oldest historical society in the nation, and our goal is to have one copy of everything printed in what is now the United States through the year 1876. We have probably 2/3 of everything printed before 1820 already on our shelves. And we have about 2 million newspapers within that time period. And we're acquiring newspapers at a prodigious clip as other institutions go out of the newspaper archiving business. And with the finger shaking still fresh in their mind about not getting rid of the originals, they're shipping the originals to us, and this is very much synonymous with what our mission is. Since 1812, it has been our mission to preserve the originals. Today, digitizing it mostly takes place at the Antiquarian Society through a commercial partnership with Redex, a division of Newsbank. And our content is sold to university and research library communities around the country where it is freely accessible for educational and teaching purposes. But that stream of commercial revenue is currently providing about 1/4 of our operating budget. Sustainability of any kind of digitizing effort is central to our thinking of what position we need to place ourselves in. But let me explain that we did not seek to commercialize for profit, if you will, just one day decide, hey, we can scan all this comprehensive stuff we spent 194 years acquiring and preserving and cataloging and make money on it. We really came at it through a much more kind of a backdoor approach, if you will, and it's very relevant to what Howard was just saying about format and file format migration. we have been in this business, and we have been in this partnership with this particular merchant, if you will, for 50 years. It started as a microprint project. It started in 1955 as a plan to use the same process that was used to create the OED compact edition, and to make it possible for universities, especially newer universities that were in the post-war 1950s, establishing new history programs, but they weren't teaching colonial history because there were no resources available in especially these Western universities. So the idea was to create, replicate what was on the shelves of the Antiquarian Society and other libraries who lent us the copies of the books that we didn't have. And so for the price of one rare book, in fact, the whole cost of the Evans microprint edition in 1955 was $700 a year for 10 years was the subscription. So for $7,000, the University of California could have access to all of the antiquarian materials, all of the historic imprints, and the metadata to go with it in an opaque card format. That was converted to microfilm. And in the early 90s, we were eager to digitize this because, to be quite honest, we didn't know if the aforesaid mentioned University of California might decide to digitize it themselves. So there was a commercial interest in maintaining the value in what had been created. And as it is now the Archive of Americana product, which includes not only all those books listed in the Evans bibliography, American imprints through 1820, and the Shaw Shoemaker bibliography that takes it, Evans through 1800, Shaw Shoemaker to 1820, but also early American newspapers, broadsides and ephemera, and we're making plans for digitizing our content chronologically by decade going forward through to 1876. The point that I want to make is that, to speak to Howard's point about the conundrum of rights, an institution like ours, 1876 was a long time ago, doesn't have the same conundrum of rights that many of you are dealing with. But we feel very strongly that libraries should assert the ownership right in the physical product, the physical items that they have bought, that they have conserved, that they have cataloged. And we assert a metadata creation right in the cataloging that we create simply because there is demonstrable added value to what we are adding in the creation of these records. Just to kind of wrap up kind of where I'm coming from, we got into this commercial relationship because of the long roots of 50 years of relationship with this particular company, and the fact that they were eager to develop not only the educational market, library market prospects, but also eventually the pay by the drink idea of per use of this data as well. Newsbank, as many of you know, is a major archiver of born digital newspapers. They archive 2,000 daily and weekly newspapers currently, and mostly when you're clicking and it says $2.95 to buy this this archive article, your credit card is going to Chester, Vermont, which is where all the production headquarters are located. So they have the capacity to help us make our content available to individual drinkers as well as to university-wide bars, if you will. So we got into this sort of in a sort of a historical evolutionary, I wouldn't say accidental, but evolutionary way. But I do feel that it is incumbent upon organizations like ours who don't, as universities do, have the endless stream of 18-year-old labor to help digitize things and put things up for open content, to take advantage opportunistically of whatever kind of partnerships can come our way, institutions like us. Because, as we all know, there is a misconception growing daily in the public's mind that all of history is Googleable now. And it's not true. We who have preserved history so comprehensively and so carefully and so assiduously, if we don't take whatever means we can to get it out in that same kind of comprehensive and accessible way, but in a sustainable financial model for us, are really going to be cheating the generations that come after us by not sharing with them, the history that we have inherited from those who came before us. So let's hear it for making a little money to keep the budget balanced. But let's do it in a way that these for-profit historical archives, if you will, or commercially based models and the open source models can work together. And I think we'll all be pulling in the same direction if that's the case. Thank you, Peter, for inviting me.
Before we move to question and answer, if everybody could set their watch back 1 hour, that'd be really useful. Any comments? Questions?
My name is Manon Rass, and I work for the Consumer Project on Technology in Washington, D.C. I was very interested by the discussion about underlying rights, which can be a real problem. And I think that I heard a lot that creators need unauthorized use to exist, to be able to create. I know you're all trying to be within the legal framework, but we have to be realistic. There's a lot of unauthorized use out there, otherwise we couldn't create. And I was wondering how you look at the way contracts such as DRMs are now being enforced through technology protection measures, which makes it almost impossible to do to use fair use or even the first sale doctrine for libraries, and how you look at the TPM's fight that is going on mostly in Europe now, because with the DMCA we lost that battle. But what's your take on it from your point of view? And then the second point is, I was very happy you mentioned the WIPO development agenda, because I work mostly with developing countries, and that is a good initiative by developing countries. However, there's another side that I'm surprised I haven't heard about today and yesterday, which is the new treaty that they're working on, which is the Broadcaster, Cablecaster, and Webcasters Treaty, which is going to create a new layer of rights. And when we talk about permission, you will have to ask for permission to the transmitters, whether it's on cable, on TV, we're used to it, but also on the web. And how you're going to deal with this, since there's also provision for TPMs in that treaty, and it's coming up next year probably.
Let me first answer not quite your question, but a variant on your question on DRM. I'm a cinema studies professor. I teach moving image preservation. I need to show clips to my students about works that have been preserved. These are usually in the extras area of a DVD. The first class of the semester, I want to show about 30 of these clips in a 4-hour class. Because of DRM, I can't make a compilation tape or DVD of those clips. I have to put each DVD in individually. go through the menu. Usually these are like 5 deep in a menu. Go through the whole startup splash screen stuff, the menu, and I spend more time going through that process to get to the clip than the clip actually plays, because I'm only going to play like 1 minute of the clip, and I might play 3 minutes getting through the process. Yet, you know, the obvious thing and the thing that we used to do with videotapes was to just make a compilation tape. But that's clearly in violation of the anti-circumvention provisions of the DMCA, because there's no fair use option. You know, that's not, you know, so just from my perspective as a professor, I'm forced to either violate the law on a regular basis or just not be able to do what I need to do for my classes. So, you know, and it just, the obvious thing, as you implied, is creators just can't get these things and they can't use these things. Even when I try to take a still image off of one of these DVD menus, so that I can put it up on the web and show my students, here, click this button on this menu and this button on this menu to get to the thing that I want them to play individually on this copy of the DVD that they actually, that we bought for them. The Macintosh turns off your ability to do a screen capture when you have a protected DVD in there. So I can't even do a single frame grab unless I use software that I'm not supposed to use. So, you know, DRM is like looming over us to, you know, it will really inhibit all of these things. I mean, you can also assume that certain kinds of things that that we have coming down the pike, like what was in the Hollings bill and is now in a new bill in terms of requiring that machines shut off if they come across copy protected things. Think about the person who's shooting a video and they've got digital audio music in the background in that room, and it picks up some of that and just shuts it off. Shuts off your video camera. So, you know, all kinds of things. And as far as the new stuff in WIPO, yeah, I totally agree with you. That's going to be a huge problem.
What will happen with the broadband, the whole broadband thing? So we're experimenting with classes using rich media materials in a broadband environment. So the same issues. How you manage rights in this environment. And it's coming.
But I mean, the good side to this is that it's probably going to totally collapse on itself. You know, it may be too late, but the kinds of underlying rights and the kinds of things inhibited from happening by DRM are not only going to hurt those of us who are in the creative or educational communities, they're going to hurt the content industry too, which mines a lot of public domain material. And, you know, plus there's the whole issue with DRM. What happens when copyright ends, you know, after 70 years or 90 years or whatever, and those things are still locked up and you don't have a key?
Between Terry's presentation yesterday and yours, Howard, today, I'm very depressed. But I have a question actually for David Dawson. In your presentation, you talked about what you described as open content, but you also talked about how it's UK only, which I find to be a bit of a misnomer. But I'd like you to, if you could, say a little more about this UK only. I mean, you alluded to, you know, the content was licensed using tax monies and so on. Of course, you know, in the U.S., things are made available that are the origin is tax monies, and it's open to the world. So, is the UK looking for other revenue sources? Are you hopeful of licensing some of this content to other areas of the world and having other revenue sources? And if not, then why not just make it open to the world?
I thought that would be coming. I wish I knew the answers, to be honest. Certainly the BBC, who is one of the people behind the Creative Archive license, has particular reasons for asserting its content to be UK only. I think some of the other things I mentioned may be in a transitory stage where the funding has been awarded, the project isn't yet live, they haven't worked out the business model, they haven't worked out how some things we've been hearing about how open content actually creates better business. So I think some of those things will change, but there are some that are sort of built deep into the regulatory system. So I think some of the things I mentioned that are down for UK only, that's unlikely to continue. Other things will stay. As you say, that brings an interesting definition of the word open when it's open for me when I'm in the UK, but it's not open for me when I happen to be in a hotel room here in the US. Or there are British children at school in a military camp in Germany, for example. So those are just some of the issues that are sort of you need to ask about all that.
Mine is the last question. At the risk of beginning a conversation that we don't have time to pursue, the model of the Antiquarian Society, which is to make available content which is free of copyright and any other underlying rights, I'm assuming, Ellen, is that correct? Right. Is a model which has to do with the Antiquarian Society needing to recover its costs of stewardship and administration, and I assume vast storage facilities for these newspapers that you're collecting. And my question, perhaps naive, is there anything antithetical to the notion of open content, to the contemporary steward or custodian of that content recovering a reasonable fee for the stewardship of that content and carrying it forward into not only the present but into the future? Otherwise, there's no economic model that sustains what the Antiquarian Society and others are doing. The current context within public broadcasting, to be specific, is whether we should charge for access to content which is free and clear on rights, but which involves the cost of digitization and storage and delivery and all of the rest. And is that antithetical to the notion of open content? And that's for the other three panelists and Ellen to respond.
I'm nodding.
Yes, it is, I think, antithetical to open content, but there are more and less severe ways of implementing the charging functions. As we've seen over the last day and a half, there are many different mechanisms that one can use to try to handle these things economically, and there's certain types of price discrimination that could be used. There's a whole lot of different things. I mean, we haven't heard from Kevin Guthrie about how Portico really essentially charges, and it's essentially an insurance policy that libraries sign up for, where they pay a low annual fee to make sure that these things are preserved over time. To me, that's a much less kind of severe than a pay per use kind of thing. There's a lot of different different economic models that are, I guess, more in line with openness than a direct sale, pay per use or pay per volume or whatever. So I'm saying that your question is there's actually much more breadth to your question.
And my answer is that's why I'm here, to try and find out.